Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 11th episode of The Knowledge Nest. Today is April 10th, and whereas in previous episodes we've been talking about what we can do for you or kind of what is going to happen in the future, and one of those things in the future is the book club later in the month of April, where we're going to be talking about The Giver of Stars. In this episode, we're going to be talking about things that happened in the recent past that are very important to libraries and to people who are interested in information and knowledge in general. This is the Idaho State Legislature's recent bill to attempt to impose penalties on libraries, and the governor of Idaho's courageous decision to veto that bill. So there have been many different interpretations of this bill, and fears about what it will do or what it won't do, and fears about things that the bill is trying to block, fears about what children are accessing in libraries, and that even extends to high schoolers and to college students. And so, in order to give the most accurate knowledge and information about this bill, I'm going to read the sections of the bill that are pertinent. So the section of House Bill number 314, as amended in the Senate, is known as the Children's School and Library Protection Act. Now, the first section redefines the definitions of obscene and harmful to minors and other terms in the Idaho State Code. It redefines a section of the Idaho State Code. This second part of the Act, the Children's School and Library Protection Act, goes a bit beyond that. Now, these are related sections. That's why they're in the same bill. However, this second section goes beyond the definition of the first part. So I'm going to read the text of this bill, and then I'm going to provide my interpretation of these things. So, notwithstanding any other provision of law, a school or public library or an agent thereof shall not promote, give, or make available to a minor any picture, photograph, drawing, sculpture, motion picture, film, or similar visual representation or image of a person or portion of the human body that depicts nudity, sexual conduct, or sadomasochistic abuse, and that is harmful to minors. There are some times where things are open to interpretation, but by and large, that's an acceptable stipulation, depending on what the intent of the librarian is, what the intent of the work is, the age of the minor, the intent of the minor, etc. That's a pretty reasonable stipulation, and parents can override that or interpret that. Any book, pamphlet, magazine, printed matter, however reproduced, or sound recording that contains any matter pursuant to paragraph A of this subsection, or explicit and detailed verbal descriptions or narrative accounts of sexual excitement, sexual conduct, or sadomasochistic abuse, and that taken as a whole is harmful to minors. Again, people have differing interpretations. The intent of this is, by and large, not that concerning. The third phrase, however, is any other material harmful to minors. Now, the definition of harmful to minors includes a lot of sexual things and things that are obviously not appropriate for extremely young children to be reading. However, includes is not an exclusive term. Any other material harmful to minors means that for any reason, if a parent does not like an item, be it religious, be it sociological, be it for any other reason, sexual or not, that material can be defined as harmful to minors. This broadens the scope of the bill beyond sexual items, and nudity in all its forms is not inherently sexual. There are times, for example, the very controversial occurrence of school children viewing Michelangelo's David. You can argue that's sexual or not, but the intent of Michelangelo was not to make it sexual. However, furthermore, phrase C, any other material harmful to minors, is a very broad definition. So then the bill continues. Any minor who obtains material, or parent or legal guardian whose child obtained material in violation of the provisions of subsection 2 of this section from a school or public library shall have a cause of action against such institution. So any minor or parent who obtains material that in the parent's view is harmful to minors in any way can have a cause of action against a library, such as CSI's library, if employees or agents of the institution gave or made available material harmful to minors, again, that broad definition. B, the institution failed to take reasonable steps to restrict access to material harmful to minors. So under this bill, libraries would have to ID minors or establish firm rules that certain sections of the library were completely off limits to all minors, or other drastic steps that are very unwieldy and unreasonable. And it would limit access to a lot of information that isn't harmful to minors but would not be available to minors just because it was in the same section as materials that had been deemed harmful to minors, again, for any reason. There are way too many unforeseen consequences of this bill, and it would have drastically reduced the effectiveness of education, the information access available to minors, and the content that was in the library, because if items aren't checked out or not used, they're weeded. And so that could have effects on that as well. The next section says, any minor, parent, or legal guardian who prevails in an action brought under this section may recover $2,500, $2,500 in statutory damages, as well as actual damages and any other relief available by law, including but not limited to injunctive relief sufficient to prevent the defendant's school or public library from violating the requirements of this section. So they could get at minimum $2,500 for every material that a minor checks out or even views in a library. And this would create essentially a free-for-all on libraries. All that would be required is for a parent to say a certain item was harmful to a child for any reason. A county prosecuting attorney or the attorney general shall have a cause of action for injunctive relief against any school or public library that has violated the provisions of subsection 2 of this section. The injunction shall be sufficient to prevent the defendant, school, or public library from violating the requirements of this section. And so, it would require libraries, if any parent, for any reason, brought a lawsuit against the library and won in the eyes of people who were responsible for that, I would assume a jury, libraries would have to take drastic and unrealistic measures. It shall be an affirmative defense to civil liability under this section that the defendant, in other words, libraries can say that they were protected and did not violate this law if the defendant had reasonable cause to believe that the minor involved was 18 years of age or older, or such minor exhibited to the defendant a draft card, driver's license, birth certificate, or other official or apparently official document purporting to establish that the minor was 18 years of age or older. So if the minor says they're 18 years of age, or verified the minor involved was accompanied at the time of the act by his parent or legal guardian or by another adult, and the adult represented that he was the minor's parent or legal guardian and signed a written statement to that effect. So for every item checked out that could be potentially deemed harmful to minors, their parent would have to sign for it. And IDing minors, every single minor that goes into a certain section of the library, could be done, but would be very, very I'm trying to think of a good way to say wasteful of time. It would be a waste of time. Especially here where we have dual credit students, we would have to ID every single dual credit student, and essentially we would have to open up to IDing every single student, because we would have to check their student ID, and then if they have a dual credit stamp, we would have to check their driver's license ID. And then we have the boilerplate. Any action brought pursuant to this section whereby on behalf of a minor shall be in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 9, Title 6, Idaho Code, Section 5306, etc. And then the bill declares an emergency. An emergency existing, therefore, which emergency is hereby declared to exist, this act shall be in full force and effect on and after July 1st, 2023. So this would go essentially into immediate effect. Thankfully, Governor Little saw that the reach of this bill was unacceptably broad. This was a very dangerous bill, and it would again have limited many students from getting access to vital information items. And so the governor wrote this letter. Dear Mr. Speaker, I hereby advise you that I have returned without my approval, disapproval, and vetoed the following House Bill, to wit, House Bill 314 AAS, as amended by the Senate, within the time prescribed by law, the same having arrived in the office of the governor at the hour of 2:05 p.m. on March 33rd, 2023. And here is the written statement of Governor Little's reasons for vetoing the bill. The ability to read is fundamental to a child's success. Many of our fondest memories as children are venturing down to our local library and immersing ourselves in the sea of books and knowledge. As governor, I have made investing in literacy a priority, and our local and school libraries are a critical component of ensuring our Idaho kids have the resources they need to be successful readers and lifelong learners. My main concern is that the bill's ambiguity will have unintended consequences for Idaho libraries and their patrons. This legislation makes sweeping blanket assumptions on materials that could be determined as harmful to minors in a local library, and it will force one interpretation of that phrase onto all the patrons of the library, allowing any parent, regardless of intention, to collect $2,500 in automatic fines creates a library bounty system that will only increase the costs local libraries incur, particularly rural libraries. These costs will be forced onto property taxpayers of Idaho or cause the libraries to close to minors altogether. Again, wasting time, wasting resources could cause the libraries to close to minors completely. I support the sponsor's intent of this bill to keep truly inappropriate material out of the hands of minors. I don't believe, this is me talking, that any of us want to give really inappropriate material to minors at all, especially little children. This is an effort I know, again, everyone in the Idaho legislature supports. Governor Little again, and here's the rest of it. However, I am also concerned that harmful content can be much more easily accessible to youth on their phones and the internet, not at their libraries. I encourage all Idahoans who have questions about any library materials to become familiar with the local policies of their duly elected library or school trustee board and engage directly with the officials who oversee them. Sincerely, Brad Little, Governor of Idaho. That is a very classy response and a very concise and firm and appropriate list of reasons for vetoing that bill. As he mentioned, there are resources and methods for parents or any patrons really who wish to have an item removed from the library to have that item removed from the library according to library policy and according to, if they're influenced by a state board, state policy, and this is challenging books. Challenging books means that you read an item in its entirety, usually, and then fill out a form requesting that the item be removed from the library, detailing which items or which sections you think are inappropriate for this library to have. And then you submit it to the library, and then it gets submitted to the board, and you may be asked to speak to the board, and then the board rules on whether or not the item is appropriate for general use in the library. To speak to Governor Little's comment that having one interpretation of an item be forced onto an item for all patrons to use, there are many different types of people who use the library, even who work at the library. I have differing viewpoints from my colleagues. They have differing viewpoints from me. We all work together fantastically. I would not dream of forcing my colleagues or any of my patrons to read only the works that I would read, or to have the interpretations of works that I have. It just wouldn't be right, and it wouldn't be ethical, or it would force one view on everyone. It would cause an ideological, religious, political, social echo chamber, and it would create essentially a dictatorship of people who have a strong viewpoint. Potentially, if this rule were followed and only minority challenges were heard, it could cause a minority viewpoint to be shared by the majority, or a majority to be shared by everyone in the minority, regardless of why they have their differing views. And so, again, vast consequences for this bill. And it is good that Governor Little vetoed the library materials bill. And after he vetoed it, the House met to try to overturn the veto, and they failed by one vote. And so, information access was preserved. However, it was only by one vote, and that is, in a word, very concerning. It means that, yes, information access has been preserved because they failed to override the veto. However, it succeeded marginally, and that is something we should be concerned about. I encourage all of you to engage in as many information resources and as many courses on information resources in as many fields as possible. Learn, love learning, love expressions of independence, and learn how to express yourself. Read whatever you want to read. Just don't force others to read only what you want them to read. That is inappropriate, and that is harmful. Thank you for today's episode, listening to today's episode of The Knowledge Nest. I'm Reed Hepler. This is episode 11, and I will see you next week. I will see you next week from Nashville, where I'm going to the Online Learning Consortium Convention 2023, or OLC Innovate. I'll be learning how to incorporate technology, open educational resources, many other resources in classroom settings, in library settings. So I'll have many new ideas. I listened to a virtual, or participated in a virtual conference on these subjects and these sessions last week, and so next week is the in-person part, and I'm very excited for that. So enjoy your spring day, enjoy the warm weather, read a book outside, and I will see you next week.